Okay, in terms of the stuff, welcome to Epistemology, which of course is the study or theory of knowledge. I'll do our usual first day stuff, namely go over the exciting syllabus, and then, if time permits, go over some content. First, this course is epistemology. As I mentioned, the literal definition is theory or study of knowledge. Deal with the questions of what can you know, what are the limits of knowledge, that kind of stuff. I'm Dr. LaBossiere, got my PhD from Ohio State University back in 1993, and I've been teaching here ever since, so like college and stuff. This, however, is the very first time this course has been offered at FAMU, brand new course, so you're the first people to experience this course. I'm not sure if that results in like medals or awards or something, but who knows. But without further ado, we'll go over the syllabus stuff. Firstly, in terms of the stuff you need for the course, the good news is, aside from paying the tuition, there's nothing else to buy. Everything is on Blackboard. So if you fire up Blackboard and go there, you'll find in the course documents a PDF containing all the readings for the course, basically the textbook. And it's got all the stuff in there, so you don't have to go and buy anything from the bookstore, etc. There's also the course notes from day one until the end. Not of all things, but just the end of the course. And you'll also find on there, since the course is, again, brand new, I haven't completed all the stuff yet, but you'll find all the notes and readings in there. And as I complete, I got the PowerPoints like mostly done, and I'll put those up there as they're completed. So all the stuff you need is there on Blackboard. Now in terms of the breakdown of the course, again, it's about knowing stuff. And I've broken the course into 4 parts. If you've had other courses with me, you've seen that I do this all the time. And again, I assume it's probably some deep-seated, psychological defect that causes me to do things in 4s, but there you go. Part 1 is this. Also, the parts essentially cover the content, but also the work for the course, the quizzes and tests are broken down by the part. So essentially, you do a part, and you're essentially done with that part, except of course for the final, if you need that. But more on that in just a bit. So the first part of the course deals with the introduction. What is epistemology about? And then of course we'll turn to where epistemology kind of gets its major start in the West, namely with our good dead friend Plato. And we'll look at the works of Plato, focusing primarily on his stuff about knowledge, the allegory of the cave, and the line. If you've ever seen the classic movie The Matrix, essentially that's a version of Plato, a version of the cave, only with many more guns and explosions. And of course philosophy is always improved by explosions, as a general rule. Which is something Michael Bay embraced. He figures, explosions make things better, so make entire movies about things exploding. And then we'll turn to skepticism. As we'll see, there's sort of a eternal battle between 2 groups in the field of epistemology. Kind of like in Star Wars. You've got the Jedi and the Sith, or like in cats versus dogs, the classic rivalries. And in the case of epistemology, the 2 main competitors are those who claim to have knowledge, sometimes referred to perhaps derisively as dogmatists, and then the other side, which are the skeptics, who claim we don't know things. And so if you wanted to put epistemology into an epic battle with 2 sides, those would be the main sides. One side saying we know things, the other side saying you know nothing. But they also say they know nothing too, so kind of double insult. Then in part 2, we'll move on to one of the classic problems in philosophy. Also the one I think which has had the most box office success in terms of movies, which is of course the problem of the external world. And the problem is basically this. Again, if you've ever seen the classic movie The Matrix, or the more recent movie Inception, the idea is basically, how do we know what we seem to be experiencing? The desk, the trees, the floor, the backpack. How do we know that's really real for real? How do we know this is not just a virtual reality, a very, very, boring video game, or that it's just a dream that you wake up and say, wow, what an unusual dream I had. Or that there's an evil demon beaming in all of this into your mind. And the question is, how do you know that this is really real for real? And this is a problem that, on one hand, seems like it's going to need a solution. Yeah, this all seems pretty real. How could it not be real? But the real challenge comes about, how do you prove it's really real for real? Now, one of the world's most famous dead philosophers, René Descartes, French guy, he endeavored to solve this problem. And he wrote his classic work, Meditations on First Philosophy. And in that, he begins by trying to doubt everything. He's the evil demon guy. He's also the guy who said, I think, therefore I am. And there's also, of course, lots of bad jokes about Descartes. I won't share them because, bad jokes. Now, we'll look at him, all his meditations, and see how he tries to solve that problem. Does he solve it? No. Does not. Sorry, spoiler. I should have said spoiler alert in that case. Then we'll turn to other people who've tried to address it as well. Other people, for example, John Locke, we'll see he takes a very practical approach. He says, yeah, you can't prove there's an external world. But he takes an approach that is actually good advice and one followed typically by video gamers today. Namely, it doesn't matter if the fire is real or in the game, you just shouldn't be standing in that fire. Because it doesn't matter whether the fire is real, what matters is the effect. So Locke essentially, again, spoiler alert, Locke essentially says, is the fire really real? You'll never know for sure. You got doubts about it? Put your head in there, see what happens. And no one sensible is going to do that. And Locke says, that's really all you need to know. Namely, don't stand in fire. I mean, that's not the only thing you need to know, but it's kind of his approach. So Locke takes a very pragmatic approach. Doesn't matter if the world's real or not, what matters is what hurts and what doesn't hurt. And he does amazing. I can't prove any of this, but no one's going to stick their head in the fire. He shouldn't have said no one, though, because there's always that person who will do that thing. And then we'll look at the person who came a bit after Locke. So he's only really, really dead as opposed to Locke dead. David Hume, who ends up being a skeptic as well. Although Hume also takes a practical approach. He says, yeah, can't prove there's an external world, but, have a beer, and you won't care. Don't know whether beer exists or not, but he says, beer is good. So, part 2, trying to prove an external world. Part 3. Now, another battle in epistemology, to further break the camps, again, there are folks who say, we know things, and the opposing camp says, you know nothing. And then within the camp that says they know things, because every group, when it's not fighting another group, there's not another group to fight, they fight themselves. And they split into subgroups and subgroups and subgroups. Like the United States today. We hate, we used to have Russians or Soviets to fight, and now I guess we got each other. So, yeah. But the Soviets are trying to get back in the game. But anyways, so within the group of people who say when they're not fighting the skeptics, they turn on each other. And one main division there are between what are called the rationalists. And rationalists say this. They say you can know what's out there in the world by pure reason. Just by thinking enough about it, you can know at least some of the things that are out there by pure reason and logic. And the empiricists say, that is crap. If you want to know what's out there, you've got to look out there. You've got to get knowledge through your senses. So you got to be able to see it, taste it, touch it. And this can be done indirectly. So empiricists, if you ask empiricists, is it okay to use like a radio telescope? They'd say sure, that's fine. Now a good question might be, how could you prove something exists just by thinking about it without looking? Well, here's a quick example. When people argue for God, one of the ways they often do it is by pure reason. That you can prove God exists, not by going out and finding God, saying, hey, are you God? But by just thinking about it. And here's the quick proof for God's existence. God has to exist. Why? Well, God is supposed to be how perfect? Yeah, perfect, absolutely perfect. Now, if God didn't exist, he wouldn't be perfect, because he'd be missing a quality, namely he'd be missing existence. But God is perfect. That means he's got to exist. Because if he didn't exist, he'd be imperfect, but he is, so he does. And so God has been proven, in a matter of minutes, by pure reason. Didn't have to look, didn't have to call God on the cell phone or text him. You just think about it, and you prove it. And this argument comes from our good dead friend, St. Anselm. It's called the ontological argument. Now, of course, people have attacked it over the centuries. Even people who believe in God have said that's a crappy argument. But it's an example of what's called a priori reasoning. Now, if you're a rationalist, you believe that kind of thing is possible. You can know stuff about the world by pure reason. Now, the opposing camp are what are called empiricists. And again, they say that that sort of thing doesn't work. If you're going to prove something exists, you've got to begin with empirical evidence. And they accept what's called a posteriori knowledge. Because a priori knowledge is knowledge prior to experience. A posteriori knowledge is knowledge after experience. Now, both camps do have some overlap. So, for example, if you were to ask a rationalist, is it possible to know some stuff through the senses? Some rationalists would say, yeah, okay, I'll allow that. And if you talk to empiricists and you ask them, are there some things you can know by pure reason? They would say, yes, there are some things you could know through pure reason. For example, okay, I've drawn a triangle on the board, but I've covered it with my hand. How many sides does it have? How did you know? That's my best bit. No, you know it has 3 sides because, yeah, triangles by definition have 3 sides. You don't have to look. You don't think, maybe this is a 7-sided triangle, the elusive, 7 triangle. But of course, to know whether, if I say I've got a triangle in my backpack, you'd have to look, because maybe I do, maybe I don't. And so you can know some things by pure reason. And empiricists would say, sure, if you have a triangle, it's got 3 sides. You don't have to look. But to know something about whether there really is a triangle, like in the backpack, you would have to look. And so we'll look at that battle between the folks who say, yeah, there's some stuff you can know by pure reason, and things you can't. We'll look at our good dead friend, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, German guy, dead. And we'll also look at Immanuel Kant, kind of German, also dead. Well, that's why the book is free, because almost everyone in it, not only dead, but super dead. And when you've been dead long enough, the work goes in the public domain, which means it's then free. Which is good, because free is a good price for a textbook. Now we'll also look at, I think both these guys are dead. One guy might still be alive. But we'll look at a work by this guy, Chisholm. He's a really famous philosopher. How many people have heard of him? Yeah, nobody. Because being a famous philosopher is like being famous at curling. Anybody know what curling is? I don't mean like bicep curling, but curling? Yeah, what is it?
It's like an Olympic sport where they move a puck down the ice and they try to knock out other pucks from the circle at the end of the ice.
Yeah, so they got a thing and they, and they sweep the ice.
Yeah.
Now, who's the gold medalist in curling?
I have no clue.
Yeah, no idea. I mean, even if you are one of the people who know about the sport, knowing who, someone's got a gold medal in it, because it's an Olympic sport, and you'll see, you'll be at, the Olympics, which everyone I'm sure will watch that curling event, and only to say, what the hell was that? Yeah, there is someone who's the most famous curler in the world, but no one knows who they are. Same with philosophy. You can be the most famous, living philosopher, and no one outside of philosophy will know who you are. So he's really, really famous. But of course, as they say, if you have to tell people you're famous, you're not famous. And if you tell people that you're a genius, you're probably not a genius. It's kind of how it works. Not my rule, I assume someone else's rule. let's look at our good dead friend. Or, I think he's still alive. Better check. Gettier, I know, is dead. I had this game I play called Dead or Not Dead, because once you get old enough, it becomes a legitimate question. Like, were they dead or not dead? I need an app for that. I can check. So Gettier, he came up with the famous Gettier problem, which is a really short article, but essentially it's one of those things that revolutionized philosophy for a long time. So I'd be remiss not to include the Gettier problem. Dun, dun, dun. In part 4, we'll go to a couple other problems. Another classic problem, not one of the biggest problems of it, but an important one, is what's called the problem of induction. If you have the logic class or critical thinking class, you've probably learned about it, hopefully learned about inductive logic, which is logic in which you deal with likelihood with probability, and your conclusion takes you beyond your premises. For example, when we make predictions, we're engaged in inductive logic. So right now we have Trump tweeting about how he's got a big button and his button works against Kim Jong-il, who says he's also got a button and his button works. And so there's a question of, will we get into war over Korea? Now at this point, of course, we're predicting towards the future. So there are experts who say that there is, a 25% chance we're going to get into war in the next, several months. Other people say there's a lower probability. And that's inductive reasoning, because we have all this evidence, but are we sure we're going to get into war? No, it's just a matter of probability. Now, a less extreme example is like an argument by analogy. And whenever you sort of product by, you're engaging in this kind of reasoning. So what you do, for example, suppose you've had the previous iPhones. And what are they on, like 10, 20? I don't know. I just lost track after a while. Too many phones. And this one is what, like blue? Is that a special feature or something? I don't know. But if you have these, suppose you had all the iPhones. You've had them. You're on the iPhone 10. Apple comes out with the next one, iPhone 11, and rather than stop at 10, like they do with their operating system. It's just 10, just more 10s. But once you hit 10, I guess that's the best. But anyways, so the next iPhone comes out. If you've always liked the iPhones, what will you probably do? Yeah, buy it, because you'll engage in inductive reasoning. I like the previous iPhones, I'll like this new one. And of course, we engage in causal reasoning every day. So for example, if you have a bag of unpopped popcorn, and you want popcorn, what do? Yeah, you put it in the microwave. Because you believe that every time previously you've put it in the microwave, you've gotten popcorn. And you believe that the next time it happens, you'll get popcorn. And if you have if it's hot in the summer and you want a cool drink, you put what in it? Ice, because you believe ice cools things down. And so that's inductive reasoning. Every time you put ice in your drink, it's gotten colder. And so you don't expect that if you put ice in your drink, it'll explode or catch on fire or turn to a flamingo or something. You don't think that's going to happen. Now the reason for that is, of course, we engage in inductive reasoning. It hasn't happened before, so it's not going to happen in the future. Now, our good dead friend David Hume, as we'll see, argued that we really have no way to prove this. That we don't know what's going to happen, so we can't really put any faith in inductive arguments. There's always a leap between our evidence and our conclusion, so we can never really know. The next time you put ice in your drink, it could turn into a flamingo. The next time you put your popcorn in the microwave, it could turn into diamonds. Not going to happen, but we have no way of proving that it can't. And for the most part, people solve this problem the way they solve most problems, is they just ignore it. It's like, hey, what could go wrong? But we'll see that particular problem. Now we'll also look at some problems of ethics and epistemology, which are what are called the ethics of belief. Namely, well, one of the main ones we'll look at is, we'll look at an essay by our good dead friend John Locke called On Enthusiasm. Now, not surprisingly, people often believe things not based on good evidence and reasoning, but based on how strongly they feel about it. People think, I really feel it's true, so it's true. But as Locke argues, the strength by which someone believes something doesn't tell us anything about whether it's true or false. And so there's a whole field in epistemology about the ethics of believing things just because you feel them, or, as we'll see when we talk about some of the other folks, about engaging, say, in willful self-deception, or presenting, as people do today, alternative facts. So questions about not only what can we know, but what are our moral obligations about knowing things? Is it acceptable to be, say, willfully ignorant, to intentionally avoid knowing stuff? You know, kind of like in the movies, when someone says, you know, someone's explaining something terrible they're going to do, and they say, oh, I just don't want to know. And that's an ethics of epistemology. What things do you have the right to say, well, just do it, I don't want to know about that. We'll also look at another big problem in epistemology, also one that's been the subject of many big budget movies, is what's called the problem of other minds. Now, philosophically, here's the problem. In my own case, I know that I think and that I feel. You know, because I'm me, I got access to all my thoughts. But of course, when I interact with other people, can I feel their pain? Like when you see someone else, can you feel their pain? Can you think their thoughts? Can you be them? No, only Bill Clinton can feel other people's pain. That's pretty rare. He has that power, among other powers. So when we see other people, we don't know what they're thinking, or, I mean, in a philosophical sense, we don't know if they're thinking or feeling. Now, to get a little sci-fi, one of the recent movie, Deus Ex, is about, Ex Machina, sorry, Deus Ex is the video game. Ex Machina is the movie. In Ex Machina, this tech guy gets one of his minions to come and do test one of his creations, this android Eva. And the test is basically to see if Eva has a mind, if she has feelings and emotions. And they're trying to figure that out. And so the sci-fi kind of problem is, if you have, say, a machine, how do you tell if it actually has feelings and thoughts? Now, we assume other humans do, but the challenge is, how do we prove that? Because we can never feel their pain, we can never be them. So in an abstract level, again, it's a theoretical, philosophical problem. How could you prove that other people actually think and feel? Well, you might say, well, they say they think. They say they have the feels. But of course, could something that doesn't think or feel say those words? Have you ever seen the Terminator movies? Terminators look like us. They act like us, but they're not us. They're here to kill us. Or movies like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, things that aren't human. So it's kind of like another sci-fi problem is, the problem of the alien or the robot. How do you tell which one is not, one of us anymore? Now, from a practical standpoint, to get away from the sci-fi and abstract stuff, there's a very practical problem of you never really know what someone else is feeling or thinking. So if someone seems sad, are they really sad? If someone tells you they'll love you forever, is that what they're actually thinking? Or are they thinking, I'm playing this fool for their money, and soon I will trade them in for a better model? You don't know. And that's a very practical epistemic problem. When people tell you things or say they feel things, how do you know they really are telling the truth? How do you know they really feel what they claim to feel? So we'll look at that problem as well. So kind of the big problems we'll look at, the overarching problems are the problem of knowledge in general. Do we know anything? Then there's the problems, more particular problems, like how do we know there's anything out there? And how do we know that other people have, minds? And how can we be sure about our reason? So that's the roadmap for the course, part 1, 2, 3, and 4. And we'll follow that map. The readings, if you've looked at them already, you'll see they're broken into those 4 parts, and I follow the stuff, in order. Same with the notes, broken into 4 parts, and I follow them obsessively in that order. Now, before pressing on to the grading stuff of the class, anything about the introductory stuff that needs more stuff. So I use the word stuff a lot. It's like my word. Well, it's not technically my word, because you can't, I haven't like trademarked or anything. Thought about it, but I'm not like Disney, I'm not that kind of person. Now, in terms of your grade, it rests on three main things: exams, quizzes, and of course, since it's a Gordon rule class, the paper. Darn you, Gordon, and your words. When I first moved here, when I first started working, they're like, yeah, there's a state law that requires students to write. I'm like, what kind of state is this? Have they no sense of decency? And then I found out about alligators and crystal meth, and I was like, that's what kind of state it is. That explains so much. So for the exams, there will be a total of 5 exciting exams. The best 4 of these count, and the standard structure will be this. It's the same thing I do in every class. Standard exam has got 25 true false, 25 multiple choice, and there's an hour timer on the test. So once you fire it up on Blackboard, you have 1 hour to complete it, and the timer, just like in a movie, in a theater, keeps on ticking even if you exit from it. Now, if you do have a problem with an exam, the thing to do is email me your name, the class that you think you have a problem with, and I've got basically 2 options. One is reset, which I'm sure you're familiar with that, but it just wipes out everything you've done. You can redo it. And the other is submit as is. Now, my default is if someone sends an email saying, I got a problem, I'll go and check, and Blackboard will put up some, red letters saying I'm wrong. And my default is always reset. But if you do want to not reset, but submit it as it is, you can, let me know. Otherwise, again, my default is reset. Typically, you want to reset, because typically, the demons of Blackboard get all demony, you get like 10 questions in. But if you get like to, close to the end of the exam, like I had one person who emailed me saying, I got a question 49, the exam just, the demons got it. And I said, do you want me to reset or, submit it? Like just submit it. I don't want to do that thing again. But by default, it is reset. So the exams, 50 questions, 1 hour to complete them. The best 4 out of 5 count. Now, for the exams, you'll see on the syllabus there are due dates. And the due dates are basically, yeah, you should probably think about doing the exam by then. The critical dates, though, are the deadlines. The deadlines are, if you don't do it by then it's too late. They'll be off Blackboard. For exams 1 through 3, the deadline is a month after the due date. So basically, we'll finish the section in 4 weeks, and then you'll have another 4 weeks to finish the exam. The exception being exam 4, because there's no more, that's the end of the semester, and the final for the same reason. There's no more 4 weeks after that. Now, since 4 out of 5 exams count, this gives you a couple options. Probably the best option is, at the end of the semester, you've done the 4 exams, the quizzes, the paper, and you're happy with your grade, and you just say, no thanks to the final. Because the best 4 out of 5 count, so that means if you don't do the final, you get a 0, but since the best 4 count, the final just gets dropped, doesn't count for you or against you. Or, best case scenario, you get into the semester, you haven't quite got the grade you want, and you see that one of your exams is not so good. In that case, you can take the final, and if it's better than the worst exam, then it replaces it. So the final is no risk. Worst case scenario, you take it, you do worse than your other exams, so it does nothing for you. Best case scenario, you take it, you do meaningfully better than another exam, it replaces it, and it bumps you up letter grade. That's good. Now, to see whether or not you need the final, because I infer that no one actually wants to take a final. They don't say, hey, finals, woohoo, good stuff. Here's how to tell. Once you've done all the stuff you wish to do in the class, you've done the 4 exams, you've done all the quizzes you care to do, done the paper, go on Blackboard, use the web browser, get your overall grade in the class, and there's a special column that says overall grade, and then download from the course documents the grade estimator. The grade estimator is a spreadsheet. Put in your quiz grade, paper grade, then your best 3 exam grades, and then put in a hypothetical 100% for the final, and then look at the result. If that result is a letter grade better than your, or better, then your current overall grade and taking the final could be worth it, because it could boost you a letter grade. If, however, getting 100% of the final wouldn't change your letter grade, again, unless you just like taking exams, there'd be no reason to take it, because it literally cannot do anything. For example, suppose you, near the end of the semester, you check, you got an 87, and you look on, do the grade estimator, and you find out that with 100% of the final, you'd have a 95 in the course, you get an A. In that case, taking the final would probably be worth it, because it'll take you some time, but you could improve your grade to an A. But suppose you look at it and you see, like, right, your overall grade is 82. If you get 100% of the final, you get an 84. Well, in that case, 82 and 84 are both Bs. So unless you just like taking exams, there'd be no reason to take it, because it would have no effect. Now, aside from the risk of emotional damage, the final is no risk. Because if you do worse on the final than your other exams, it just gets dropped. If you do better, it gets kept. So doing more work can never lower your grade, it either leaves it the same or improves it. Quizzes. There'll be 20 plus quizzes, maybe like 30 or something. The best 10 of these count, and they're 30%. They're 5 questions, true or false, 5 minutes, timed, and once you fire them up, they're on the timer. And if you get 10 perfect quizzes, you'd be done. You get 100% in your quiz category, and your quiz done, or quiz cap, whatever you want to think of that as. If you have less than 10 perfect quizzes, and your overall grade is not already an A, then it's worth it to keep taking more quizzes, because if you do better on a quiz, it gets kept. If you do worse on a quiz, it gets dropped. And so, until you get to an A in the course, or 100% of the quizzes, it's pretty much worth it to keep taking quizzes. Because again, it's no risk, except for emotional damage, but it can only leave your grade the same, or improve it. Now, the way the quizzes work is, if you go into the quiz folders, there'll be a folder for the quizzes, and then within the folder, there's more folders. What a surprise. And then within the folder, there'll be the quizzes for that section. So part 1 has got the quizzes for part 1, and there's a syllabus quiz, which counts as one of the quizzes, and there's also currently 6 other quizzes for part 1. And then it says what the quiz is about, and again, once you fire it up, then you've got 5 minutes to finish it. So don't actually start it unless you're ready to take it. Once you get 10 perfect quizzes, again, you're done. If you don't get 10 perfect ones, keep on taking them. And they're 30% of the total. There's also the paper. It's a Gordon rule, so it means it's got to be 2,000 words. And we'll go over the paper in much more detail a bit later on. And there's one paper, and it counts, and it's 30% of the grade. Now, for the due dates and deadlines and stuff, you go by the 4-week schedule. So with the quizzes, their deadlines is every 4 weeks, roughly. So the quizzes for part 1, you can work on them anytime you want. You could do one like when we cover the material and just go and do it then when it's fresh in your mind. You could do them all ahead of time. You could wait till the last second, do them all then, your choice. But just be sure to complete them by end of day, February 2nd. For part 2, March 2nd, part 3, April 6th, and then part 4, April 27th. For the exams, as I mentioned, their deadline is a month after the due date, that section, except for exam 4 and the final, because there's no more after that. So exam 1, March 2nd is the deadline, exam 2, April 6th, exam 3 and 4, April 27th. And exam 5, deadline for that is the end of the normal final exam time, which I believe is Thursday afternoon, but I'll need to, it's on the syllabus. For some reason it slips my memory at this moment. So with those, so the deadlines, again, you can do stuff ahead of time, just be sure to completify stuff before the deadline, because then they are no longer available on Blackboard. Now, overall grade. Now, as I mentioned, once you've done 4 exams, paper, all the quizzes you wish to do, look at your overall grade, decide whether you want to take the final or not. Now, the overall grade is calculated this way, and it's done in real time. So every time you do something, it updates. So it takes your best 4 exams, pulls them in, they're 40%. It grabs your best 10 quizzes, pulls those in, they're 30%, grabs your paper grade, pulls it in, that's gonna be 30%. Now, if you haven't done anything, it's pulling in 10 zeros for the quizzes, 4 zeros for the exams, and a 0 for paper, which means your overall grade would be 0. Now, when you see that, sometimes people like look at it and say, what, have I already failed the class before I've taken it? The answer is no. The overall grade, again, is your real-time, real grade in the class. It's what you get if you just stop doing stuff at that moment, and that's the grade that would go into the books. So as you do stuff, it will start pulling in those scores. Now, what's important to keep in mind is that as you're doing stuff, it's still going to be pulling in zeros. For example, if you take quiz 1, it'll pull in quiz 1, but then it'll pull in 9 zeros. Once you do quiz 2, it'll pull quiz 1 and 2 in, but then it'll pull in 8 zeros. So until you do stuff, it's still pulling in a lot of zeros. So your overall grade will look bad. But keep in mind that the overall grade is not, it's not your average. It's your real grade in the class. It's like think of it like, to use a couple analogies. One way to think of it is like a progress bar when you're downloading something. You know, it's not showing the average, the download, it's showing how far you have to, how far you are away from 100% at that moment. Or like if you're, playing a video game and leveling up your character, it's like your experience bar. It's showing your progression towards that at that moment. So it's your real grade in the class at that moment, but again, it's not your average. Be sure to check that grade using a web browser. For some reason, the app has never been accurate. I remember the first time, when I first started using Blackboard, someone had the app and they said, it says my grade is 267,000%. What does that mean? I said, it doesn't mean anything. And I was worried that I somehow screwed up the column in Blackboard, but I checked, and it's just a simple, calculated, weighted average, just, normal stuff. And I went to the Googles, and the Googles had no idea, and they said, hey, yeah, it just kind of does that. I'm like, you should probably fix that. And I'm like, maybe. We'll be dead. We'll be dead soon, why bother? Like, okay, that's cool. Okay, so overall grade thing, again, it's your real grade in the class, but again, it's not your average. So it'll be scary for a while. Hopefully not scary at the end. Okay, other stuff in the course. Learning compacts, they're in there. So if somebody asks you about the learning compacts, I did mention them. Basic idea is you'll learn stuff, specifically about writing, reading communication, and some critical thinking, logic stuff, and about methods of philosophy. Also the QEP used to be critical thinking. Now I think it's about like writing or square dancing or something. I'm not sure. But we'll be doing that stuff. So if someone asks you about that, you can honestly say that I mentioned it, unless you decide you don't like me already, in which case you can say, you didn't say anything about that. Last thing for the syllabus, special stuff. If you have special circumstances, which by definition could be anything, that's special, the thing to do as a practical matter is let me know as soon as possible if these affect the class. And the reason is a very practical one. If I know about a person's situation now, or as soon as possible, then things can be done about that. Like if someone has like a job conflict, like with one of the days of the course, or they are in the National Guard, they get deployed someplace. But as long as I know ahead of time, I can work with that. What often happens though, unfortunately, is people, like a couple days after the semester, the grades are in, people will say, well, I had all this stuff. I'm like, yeah, at this point, there's nothing, literally nothing I can do. So if you have something that's special circumstance, it affects the class, let me know as soon as possible, and I'm always happy to work with people to make, things possible. Now, there's a lot of other stuff in the syllabus. I won't grind through that, because you can look at it or ignore it at your convenience on Blackboard. But before going to some content in our remaining time, anything about the stuff so far that needs more, also the paper. Paper stuff. I mentioned there is paper, and we'll go over that in considerable detail so you know what to do, what to expect, so there are no questions like, what are we doing? Which can be a question. One time I was teaching for someone else, and the paper assignment was write a paper in philosophy. And as soon as it come in, it's like, what do we do? And I had no idea, because they hadn't told me. And I'm like, and you can't tell people, like, I have no idea what's going on. So yeah, well, you'll know what to do for the paper. Now, the deadlines for the paper are these. The due date for the draft is essentially a suggestion of, if you really need to pass the class, to keep like your scholarship or graduate or something, then you might want to do a draft by the due date. That's kind of like a, yeah, if you really need to pass, maybe do something by then. The critical dates, though, are the actual deadlines, because deadlines are when things can no longer be done. If you wish to do a draft, you can do as many drafts as you want until you get sick of the process and just say, no drafts. Or you get the score you want, then you just upload the final version of Blackboard and you're done. Or time runs out. And time for drafts runs out on April 5th. Now after that, there are 3 deadlines of increasing badness for turning in the paper, or decreasing goodness. The first deadline is the +5 deadline, and that's the real deadline. That's when the paper is supposed to be done. And if you turn the paper on Blackboard by end of day on April 10th, you get your base score +5. Just 5 points for being on time, and for being you, because everybody is themselves. Which is totally true. Now, suppose you need more time, or things go wrong. Well, then there's an extra week in which you can turn the paper up to a week later, end of day. It's the emergency deadline in case things go wrong. In that case, you get full credit for the paper. Now, there's also the Desperation Deadline, which is April 27th, and that is if things go like really wrong, or sometimes happens, people forget they're even in the class. They're like, oh crap, I'm in a class. I should probably write a paper or something. And that's 50% credit. Now, 50%, of course, is not great, but 50% of something is better than 100% of nothing, unless it's death. I would take 0% of that death stuff. So those are the options for the paper. Again, you can do as many drafts as you wish. If you are not completely confident in your ability to write a grade philosophy paper, draft's a really good idea. But again, April 10th, turn it in by then, end of day, base score +5. That's the main extra credit. April 17th, in case things go wrong, full credit. And April 27th, Desperation Deadline, 50%. In case you're wondering, people do pass with a 50% deadline. So now they usually it's like a C, but it's better than not passing. Okay, so that's the paper stuff. Again, we'll go over in great detail about how to actually do the paper and other such stuff. Okay, now before going on to some content stuff, anything about the syllabus stuff? It needs more stuff.
Are the quizzes 1 to 10?
Yep, yeah, good question. Yeah, quizzes, exams, 1 try. So before firing it up, be sure you're ready for it. I mean, they're not that bad. Also extra credity stuff. As I mentioned, there's the +5. You do the paper on time, you get 5 points added on the paper, which is roughly like 1 1/3 points to your overall class grade, which is not like a whole bunch, but it is something for just being on time. Not too bad. Now the other extra credity stuff, because people tend to ask me about extra credity things, is actually built into the class. How so? Well, kind of the standard deal for extra credit is usually people ask, can I do extra stuff to get more grades? And the answer is, well, of course. In fact, they're built into class. So for the exams, the best 4 to 5 count. So you can think of one of the exams as being like extra. You only need 4, but you get an extra one in case things don't go great on one of them. For the quizzes, I will fill the course up with quizzes. Now, you don't have, people say, well, wow, it's a lot of quizzes. Well, but it's actually good, because you only need 10. If you just knock out 10 perfect quizzes, you're done. But if you don't knock out 10 perfect quizzes right away, the more quizzes the better, because it's like getting lottery tickets. You just give them lottery tickets for free, and you keep playing. And so the best 10 of these count, and so you can think of all those extra ones as the extra credit quizzes. They're just more quizzes you can keep trying until either you get to 100%, you get sick of taking quizzes, or you hit the limit of like 25 or 30 quizzes. With a paper, the extra credit is turning it in on the actual deadline, and of course you can rewrite the paper as many times as you want until either you get the grade you want, or your brain just tells you, please, no more, please. Okay. Now, finally, hopefully for real, anything else before going on to the content stuff? Okay, as I mentioned, the definition of epistemology is pretty easy. It comes from the Greek episteme, meaning knowing, and of course the suffix ology means what? Yes, study or science of. So literally it is the science or study or theory of knowing stuff. Now in everyday life, of course, we throw around the terms to know. And in normal everyday life, by know we usually mean believe. Because people will use the term I know when really they don't know. For example, someone might say, oh, I know I've got the keys, and then they get there and they realize they don't have the keys, so they didn't know. Or someone thinks they know the answer, but they don't know. So just like within the academic field, there are the everyday use of terms like know, and then there are the more technical terms, use of the term know. Now there are 3 different types of knowledge, and even though these are broken down kind of academically, you'll see they do match our common sense use of the term. First, there's what's called knowledge by acquaintance, which pretty much means what you probably think it means, that you know something or someone. So you can take like a literal acquaintance. You could say I know Sally because she's your acquaintance. There's also, of course, what's called competence knowledge, where you have skills. You know how to do something. So if someone says, oh, I know how to fix a defective hard drive, or I know how to make pancakes. Now, for the most part, with some exceptions, philosophers tend to focus on the third category, namely what's called propositional knowledge. Now, in philosophy, a proposition is a claim that is either true or false. This is different from a sentence, because a sentence could contain many claims, many propositions. For example, if someone says they had pancakes for breakfast and then won the Olympics, gold medal in the Olympics, well, that's one sentence, but 2 claims. And one could be true. They could have had pancakes for breakfast, but not won the gold medal. So, in the case of knowing propositional knowledge, you know that proposition. You know that, in the case of any proposition, it's just any claim. Like knowing that 2 + 2 is 4, or knowing that elephants are larger than mice. Now, put in very general terms, epistemology tends to focus on 3 main questions. And pretty much any problem we run into, we can kind of stuff into one of those questions. Namely one, what is knowledge? Which is the question of, what is it to know something? Now, this is looked at both abstractly and more concretely. Because again, this is kind of the abstract philosophical question, like, what is knowledge? But then there's a much more practical questions about what it is where you can say you know something. And we've tried to work some of these out in concrete settings. For example, law, a trial, is an exercise in applied epistemology. Because in a criminal trial, if you are the prosecutor, what are you trying to do? You're trying to show, yeah, guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And so the epistemic standard of what's considered, you can say we know they're guilty, the standard there is beyond a reasonable doubt. Yeah, and so a trial is a case of applied epistemology. We have a level of, this is the proof we accept, and we can say that we know they're guilty, or establish that. And of course, other contexts have different levels. There's like, for civil trials, for example, it's less. There's also, to use another pragmatic situation, think about military intelligence, or just intelligence in general. So if we claim claim to know there's a terrorist attack coming, a good question is, what level of evidence do we require before we trust people? And if we look back at the invasion of Iraq, one of the main justifications was that they supposedly had WMDs, and we're still looking for them. I'm sure they're somewhere. And it was claimed that we had this source called curveball, which probably should have been a giveaway right there. But people put a lot of faith in that person, that source, but it turns out they shouldn't have. They thought they knew, but they did not know. Second question is, this is about the skeptic. Can we know anything at all? And this can range from just sweepingly, is there anything we can know, to particular problems, like, can we know that there's a world that's really real for real? Can we know that other people have thoughts and feelings? Can I know that when a person says they'll love me forever, they're telling the truth? And so there are questions about what we can know. Thirdly, there's the question about, how do we get this knowledge? What are the means? And we looked at some of the issues here, like, can we know things just by thinking about it? Can I say, God is perfect, he's got to exist, because if he didn't exist, he wouldn't be perfect, but he is, so he does. Well, I know by pure reason. Or do I have to go and have empirical evidence for things? So how do we get this knowledge? Now this can range, again, from fairly abstract stuff, like in general, how do we get knowledge? Does it be through the senses, through reason? But it can also be applied very concretely to things. For example, going back to the example of spying, how reliable should we consider various methods of gathering intelligence? So if, for example, one thing that the government's always wanted to do, because they're governments, is expand how much of our business is their business. Governments always do that. They're always trying to get in everybody's business. Now, for example, they want to be able to scoop up everybody's, say, phone calls and emails. And a good question is, there's a moral question, should they do that? But there's also the epistemic question. Would scooping up everyone's phone calls, would that give us knowledge about terrorists? Would it give us information, actionable intel? Or are we just, gathering stuff for no good purpose? So the three core questions are, what is knowledge? What can we know? And how do we get this knowledge? How do we get that stuff? Now, in terms of what is knowledge, Plato pretty much created the standard. And it lasted pretty well up until this fellow Gettier came along. So one reason why Getty is philosophically famous was because he kind of broke kind of broke the system. And so the idea was this. Plato kind of set the stage by saying to know something means you believe it. And that's the easy part. Believing means you just say, yep, I believe it, and you really believe it. And of course, can you know something that's not true? Because if it's not true, is it something you know? I mean, you can know that something is not true, but can you know a falsehood? Like, can you know that 2 + 2 is 7? Well, what could you believe it, but could you know it? Suppose someone says, I know that 2 + 2 is 7. Does that make sense? No, because they're wrong. You know, so yeah, so if something's not true, you can believe it, but you don't know it. So knowledge has got to be something that's true. Now, one of the big debates that we'll see as we look at Plato is being right, is that enough? And one sort of intuitive view is, hey, I got it right, I know it. But if we think about that a bit, we can think, well, the person got it right, but they really didn't know. And so we require, going back to Plato, that the belief be justified, appropriately credentialed. For example, suppose, I'll use a real life example, like roulette. Or one time, a friend of mine had like a roulette game. And they said, well, what's the number gonna be? And I said, 42. And 42. I believed it, I was right, but then I know, do I have psychic powers that I can predict the results of gambling? How do you know I don't have that? Because I'd be dressed much better, or I'd probably be on my own, Caribbean island, and you wouldn't see me, just like hanging out on the beach. I mean, I like teaching, but I like the beach a lot. I guess I come back and teach sometimes, because you can't spend all your life on the beach, on your tropical island, enjoying, the beach. Yeah, so I got it right, but I was not justified. Another example, that's silly, is like doing a math exam. You might guess and get it right, just like 17. But of course, you're not really justified, which is why they always tell you to show your work, that you actually were doing it the right way. Now, pretty much, the part about, it's got to be true, you got to believe it, everyone, still says, yeah, knowledge requires true belief, and it's got to be presumably justified in some way. But as you might imagine, philosophers fight about what is truth. I mean, we generally have an intuitive view of truth. Truth means what you say matches the world. But then the question is, how does that work? How does making noises match the world? And where the biggest battles are typically over justification. At what point can you say, yes, I don't just believe it, it's not just true, but I really do know it. Now, as I mentioned, sort of the opposing camp include, one side says, we know things, the other side says, you know nothing. So skepticism is the opposing camp. Or if you're in the camp, it's the correct camp, and the other side is the opposing camp. Philosophically, a skeptic is someone who says, we don't have knowledge. Now, the most extreme form of skepticism is called radical or extreme skepticism, and that's the view that we have no knowledge at all, or sum total of knowledge is 0. Now, a smart radical skeptic, if you ask them, so, do you know that we know nothing? They would say, I see what you're doing there. But no, I don't know that I don't know nothing. I don't even know that. And so a clever radical skeptic doesn't say they know that we know nothing. They just say, it doesn't seem like we have any knowledge. We don't even know that we don't know that we don't know. Which of course is kind of annoying, but there you go. Now there are many, just like there are many flavors of ice cream, There are many varieties of skepticism, but they're not particularly delicious. And they typically vary by how much they doubt. Now, in everyday life, when someone says, well, I'm skeptical, what they really mean is, they're doubting. They want some proof. And you can range from sort of like a pragmatic skeptic, like I don't believe stuff unless there's some evidence, to, again, total radical skepticism, where you don't believe in anything. And we'll see the various varieties. And again, it's basically a matter of how far your doubt extends. So, for example, one form of skepticism says, yeah, you can know mathematics, you can know empirical stuff, but all that metaphysical stuff, questions about God and so forth, can't know any of that stuff. And then again, there's the extreme version which says, can't know anything. And so one of the battles we'll see throughout the course of the course is between those who say, you know stuff, and those who say, nope, don't know nothing. Also, as mentioned earlier, within the group of people who say, we know stuff, they of course turn on each other, with one side saying, rationalism, the other side saying empiricism. Now, where they differ is this. If you're a rationalist or an empiricist, and you're asked, do you know stuff? Both sides would say, yes, we know things. We know things and stuff. Where they divide, though, is how you know stuff. If you're a rationalist, that is to say, you subscribe to rationalism, you believe that reason is sufficient to discover truth, that you can know at least some things that exist out there by pure reason. And again, historically it's been typically God. Descartes, Leibniz, St. Anselm, they typically say by just thinking hard enough about God, you'll know that God exists. The empiricists, who accept empiricism, they claim that everything you know comes from out there through the senses. Now again, rationalists can also accept that you could know things about the world through the senses. Sort of extreme rationalists say, no, only reason for knowledge. But your typical kind of moderate rationalist says, yeah, you can know some things through the senses. Empiricists, though, to be an empiricist, it's stricter. You can't know anything about the world except through the senses, if you're an empiricist. Now, can empiricists use reason? Yeah. But the starting point always has to be something that is empirical. And in fact, if you've done any science classes, they call them the empirical sciences because everything in the empirical sciences, you've got to begin with some sort of observation, some empirical data. And now you can go and do all kinds of formulas and equations and mathematics from there, but you have to be able to trace it back to something empirical. Whereas the rationalists say, at least some things you know about the world, you can just trace back to pure reason. And that's kind of the classic battle within people who claim we can know. One side says, I can know stuff just with my mind, which sounds kind of weird and crazy, but here you go. And the other side says, no. If you know something about the world, you got to be able to trace it back to some empirical observation. You can do math and stuff, but about the world, you got to be empirical. Now, the first major dead guy we'll look at is our good dead friend, Plato, which is actually his wrestling nickname. It literally means kind of like chunky or chubby. It'd be kind of like if The Rock, when he develops his philosophy, which I'm sure he'll do, if we refer to, the works of The Rock. Because Plato was actually an Olympic class wrestler, so he couldn't convince people with reason, give it a Plato crush. Probably very effective. That's far away won most of his arguments. So yes, Plato, please don't crush our skulls. Now, Plato, as we'll see, he would be classified as a rationalist, pretty hardcore, because he claims that the senses are utterly useless when it comes to knowing stuff. Now, he doesn't claim the senses are useless, but if you want to claim to know stuff, Senses can't help you. Now, traditionally, because of this, there have been two main avenues of knowing stuff: the senses and reason. Plato, as we'll see, says the senses can't give us knowledge. Whatever comes to the senses doesn't give us knowledge. And he presents this in his famous allegory of the cave. Again, if you've seen the movie The Matrix, you've seen the allegory of the cave, only with, lots of explosions. So the first main dead guy we'll look at will be Plato doing his Plato stuff. Now, another point of contention among philosophers who claim to know stuff is this question: are there any innate ideas? Now, if something's innate, where does it come from?
It's natural.
Yeah, it's built in. So philosophers, going back to Plato, have argued about this question. If you take the mind, is there stuff already in there before you're born, or is it empty when you're born and you have to get stuff put in there? And this division is also part of the rationalism-empiricism conflict. Rationalists typically say there are innate ideas, this stuff built in. Empiricists like John Locke say, well, Locke had the famous phrase, tabula rasa, which is blank slate, that when you're born, the mind is blank. And what happens is there's nothing in there until you start experiencing stuff. And then experience starts putting stuff in there. And I'll use two analogies or metaphors to illustrate these views. Now, back in the early days of computing, the first computer I got was a Commodore 64. It had 64 kilobytes, not megabytes, certainly not gigabytes, 64 kilobytes. My Fitbit has more memory than that. Actually, a cup of coffee probably has more memory than that now. But in its day, it was, good computer. But if you plugged it into a TV, which pretty much you did because there really weren't monitors back then, and you turned it on, all you would see was a blinking cursor, because it came with nothing, it did nothing. It was a blank slate, nothing in the memory. Then you have a hard drive. This is like before hard drives. So if you wanted it to do anything, you had to start, type in like a program. You had to type it in and load it into memory. So for the empiricist, that would be like the mind. Like you're like that Commodore 64. You got a processor and memory, but nothing's in there. So as a child, you'd start learning stuff. Stuff would start pouring in through your senses. You'd process it, and then eventually you would know stuff. Now, for the rationalist, though, think about the phone or laptop that you bought. Nowadays, when you get a laptop or a phone and you turn it on, what happens? Is it just a blinking cursor? No, there's already all kinds of stuff in there. You get an operating system, you've got programs, apps, etc., and it's pre-stocked in the factory with all this stuff. And so the rationalist, that would be their model. So, like when you get your phone, pre-installed in the factory are the operating system, Android, or iOS or Windows, and a bunch of apps. And so the rationalists say that, that's the model. They would typically say God did this. You're born, and your mind or soul is pre-stocked with all this stuff. Now, you may not be aware of it. As we'll see when we look at Leibniz, you may not know what's in there, but the idea is there's all kinds of stuff in there. You're pre-stocked. Now, for the empiricist, another metaphor is this. You can kind of imagine for the empiricist, it's like you're in a room, and there's like openings in the room through which Lego blocks come through. One opening is the eyes, one opening the ears, and the room is empty except for you. And you're just kind of sitting there, and then as you experience stuff, Lego blocks come pouring in, or they're put in as like, already pre-constructed. And then, of course, what you can do is you can take the Lego blocks and take them apart and reassemble them, etc. But until the Lego blocks start coming in, you're all alone in that empty room. Now, the empiricists would say, like when you're, the rationalists would say you're in the room, but there's already stuff in there. You know, there's already things in there with you. Not scary things, but, you know, other stuff. So one of the big debates is, when you're born, is there nothing in there, or is there something in there? Now, in addition to the sort of abstract philosophical question, what's in the mind and the soul, there's very practical concerns. To give one example, if we're pre-stocked with all kinds of stuff in there, that certainly impacts how we would learn. So if we already have, you know, Plato, for example, claims we're preloaded with geometry. It's already in there. You're not initially aware of it, but it's in there. And so, as we'll see, in the Meno, which we'll look at, he claims that we learn all this stuff, well, spoiler alert, when we're dead, and we recollect it. So all kinds of stuff is already in there. Now, unfortunately, it's not things like the winning number of the lottery next week, or a really good recipe for pancakes. It's stuff like geometry, justice, beauty, you know, fairly abstract stuff. So Plato believed there's all kinds of stuff built in there. Other people who believe in innate ideas would include our good dead friend Gottfried Leibniz, and of course René Descartes. Philosophers who say innate ideas are ridiculous would include George Berkeley. He's the tree falls in the forest guy. You know, the question of tree falls in the forest, there's no one there to hear it. That came from Berkeley. And his answer is, in case you're ever wondering, is it does make a sound. Why? Because God is watching everything all the time. Which sounds cool until you think, like, when you're in the shower, God's watching you. But it's okay, because nothing, he created everything, so it's nothing he hasn't seen before. It's literally nothing new to him. So that's one of the main debates. So the rationalists believe in a priori knowledge. Our first example will be our good dead friend Plato. They, of course, don't say we can't have empirical beliefs. Those are fine. But they do buy into this a priori knowledge. Again, stuff you know by pure reason. And our examples of rationalism will be our good dead friend Plato, our good dead friend Descartes, our good dead friend Kant, and also our good dead friend Leibniz. Next time, on the Thursday, we'll pick up looking at empiricism. So have a good rest of the day. If you didn't get a chance to sign the roll, you should do so, so I put you down as attended. Okay, that's all right. I'll put you in the questions attended, and then next week I'll fresh roll with all the.
Okay. No one's going to be in there about it?
Yeah.